The flight that would change everything. The airport terminal buzzed with the hum of 1,000 stories, each traveler caught in their world of comings and goings. Among them stood Kevin, a tall, dignified black man in his mid-40s, his quiet confidence reflecting years of discipline and dedication. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his polished shoes gleaming against the dull airport carpet. His journey this time, however, was personal, a much-needed respite from the pressures of work and life. He adjusted his grip on his carry-on, briefly revealing a worn leather wallet inside his bag. Its edges were frayed, and from a side pocket, a small laminated card peeked out, the one that represented years of hard work, discipline, and grit. A pilot's license. But today, Kevin intended to leave that role behind and embrace the simplicity of being a passenger. As he approached the first-class line, Kevin noticed a petite flight attendant with meticulously coiffed blonde hair watching him from the corner of her eye. She stood at the gate, her stance radiating authority, a faint sneer tugging at the corner of her mouth as she noticed him in line. The name on her badge read Sarah. Kevin didn't think much of it. He'd encountered various personalities in his line of work and had grown accustomed to handling all kinds with a steady composure. Yet, when he stepped forward to hand over his boarding pass, Sarah's voice dropped, cool and mocking. "Sir," she said with exaggerated emphasis, her eyes scanning his attire with a glimmer of disdain, "I believe economy boarding is back there." She gestured vaguely over her shoulder, her tone laced with sarcasm. Kevin, unfazed, maintained his polite demeanor. "Actually, I'm in first class," he replied, handing her the boarding pass with a steady hand. Sarah's eyes flicked down to the pass. She glanced at it, surprise registering briefly before she forced a tight, professional smile. "Well," she muttered, her voice barely audible as she handed the pass back, "seems like anyone can buy a first-class ticket these days." Her tone, though low, was enough to catch the attention of a few nearby passengers, some of whom exchanged uncomfortable glances. Kevin's jaw tightened momentarily, but he let it pass. He'd learned long ago that dignity spoke louder than a raised voice, especially in settings where he was outnumbered or unfairly judged. He stepped forward, his head held high, his gaze fixed straight ahead, as he walked down the jet bridge toward the cabin. As he boarded, he noticed other members of the cabin crew, each one appearing caught between professionalism and curiosity. There was Alex, a young attendant with a gentle face who seemed to assess Sarah's treatment of Kevin with a hint of disapproval. But when Sarah caught him glancing, he quickly busied himself, averting his eyes and moving about his duties with a nervous energy. Kevin found his seat, stowing his bag overhead before settling into the plush first-class seat. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the steady hum of the engines soothe him. Today, he reminded himself, was supposed to be about peace and distance from the stresses of his career. He intended to stay focused on the relaxation he'd been craving. As the flight settled into its cruising altitude, the seatbelt light dinged off, and the cabin crew began their in-flight service. From his peripheral vision, Kevin could see Sarah wheeling her cart down the aisle, her demeanor noticeably cheerful as she engaged warmly with the passengers seated around him. Her tone was friendly, her smile bright, until she reached his row. Her expression shifted subtly, the friendly warmth evaporating as she placed a cup of water on his tray with a barely concealed flicker of distaste. "Here you go," she said curtly, moving on to the next row before he could even thank her. Kevin took a measured breath, keeping his composure. It wasn't the first time he had encountered prejudice, but he couldn't recall ever experiencing it so blatantly, especially in such close quarters. He could feel the weight of stares around him, both curious and sympathetic, as passengers observed the interaction with varying degrees of discomfort. From his seat a few rows ahead, Alex shot Kevin an apologetic look. He opened his mouth as if to say something, hesitated, then returned to his duties. Kevin offered him a reassuring nod, appreciating the silent acknowledgement. He knew that speaking up was often easier said than done, particularly in an environment like this one. Throughout the cabin, Murmurs began to ripple as more passengers noticed the uneven treatment. An elderly couple nearby exchanged disapproving glances, the woman leaning close to whisper to her husband, "Did you see that? The way she treated him, it's just not right." Unbeknownst to Sarah, her actions were stirring discontent, sparking a silent but growing unrest among the passengers. But Sarah seemed oblivious, continuing her duties with the same uneven courtesy. Kevin remained silent, opting not to let her behavior disturb his peace. He had come here to unwind, and that's what he intended to do. As the flight continued, Kevin allowed his thoughts to drift. He reflected on the countless hours spent in cockpits, the thrill of takeoff, the delicate focus needed during every landing. Each flight represented years of dedication, hours of meticulous preparation, and an unyielding commitment to safety and precision. It was a role he loved, one that made him feel alive and respected. He glanced out the window, admiring the expanse of clouds stretching toward the horizon. Despite the tension within the cabin, there was a certain serenity in being at such an altitude, an isolation that made the day-to-day challenges of life on the ground seem a little smaller. Lost in his thoughts, he barely noticed Sarah's return. She breezed by, her cart rattling as she distributed snacks to each passenger in his row with a dismissive automatic rhythm. When she reached him, her movements were abrupt, almost careless, spilling crumbs across his tray. She didn't meet his eyes, her face an expression of tightly controlled disdain. Kevin's patience was wearing thin, but he held his tongue. He knew that confronting her in the middle of a flight wouldn't change her perspective. It would only confirm whatever stereotypes or biases she harbored. Instead, he shifted his focus back to the window, centering himself as he had done countless times in high-stress situations. Yet, despite his efforts to ignore it, the tension was palpable. It lingered in the cabin, stirring discomfort among the other passengers, many of whom were now openly watching Sarah with barely concealed disapproval. The atmosphere in first class felt heavy, the usual tranquility disrupted by the undercurrent of silent judgment. An hour into the flight, turbulence began to rock the cabin, shaking the plane with increasing intensity. Passengers gasped as they gripped their armrests, the sharp dips and sudden jolts rattling nerves. Then, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot speaking. We're experiencing a bit of turbulence, so please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Thank you for your cooperation." Kevin's instincts sharpened. His years of experience told him that this was more than ordinary turbulence. The frequency and intensity were unusual, the pattern irregular. He could tell something was wrong. Just then, he noticed Alex rushing towards Sarah and pulling her into a whispered conversation near the galley. Though their voices were low, their alarmed expressions told Kevin all he needed to know. This wasn't just turbulence. There was a problem, a big one. As Alex glanced toward the cockpit, a look of barely concealed panic in his eyes, Kevin knew he couldn't stay seated. Whatever was happening required immediate attention. He unbuckled his seatbelt, standing as the plane continued to jolt. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but urgent as he addressed Alex and Sarah. "I couldn't help but notice. Is there an issue in the cockpit?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, her earlier hostility flaring as she replied, "This is an emergency. Please return to your seat." Alex's expression softened, recognizing something in Kevin's calm and assured demeanor. "Are you a pilot?" he asked quietly, hope flickering in his voice. Kevin nodded. "Commercial. 15 years of experience. If there's an issue, I can help." Sarah looked ready to protest, but Alex overruled her with a quick nod. "Come with me, sir. We may need all the help we can get." With a final, tense glance at Sarah, Kevin followed Alex toward the cockpit, his focus shifting entirely to the task at hand. The turbulence was worsening, and as the plane shuddered and groaned, Kevin knew that his skills were about to be put to the ultimate test. Rising above the turbulence, as Kevin made his way toward the cockpit with Alex, the gravity of the situation settled over him. Passengers watched him with a mix of hope and apprehension, clutching armrests and exchanging nervous glances as the turbulence grew more intense. The plane dipped sharply, sending an overhead luggage bin creaking open and scattering belongings onto the aisle floor. Gasps and muffled cries rippled through the cabin. Outside the cockpit, Alex shot him a grateful but tense smile. "Thank you for stepping in, sir. I have to admit." As Alex opened the cockpit door, Kevin took in the scene. Flashing control panels, the high-pitched beeping of warning alarms, and the sweat-streaked face of the co-pilot, who was struggling to manage the controls alone. The captain slumped in his seat, unconscious, his face pale and slack. The co-pilot looked up, relief washing over him when he saw Kevin. "You're the pilot?" he asked, his voice strained with effort. "Kevin, commercial pilot for over a decade," Kevin confirmed, quickly sliding into the vacant seat next to the co-pilot. He scanned the panels, assessing the situation with practiced calm. The co-pilot released a shaky breath. "Thank God. I'm struggling here. Captain just collapsed out of nowhere, and now I'm alone in this turbulence trying to navigate it all." Kevin's hands moved over the controls, his fingers steady. "We'll manage this together. I've got your back." The co-pilot nodded, visibly relaxing as he observed Kevin's assured movements. They worked together in tense synchronization, the plane still shuddering as Kevin expertly adjusted the altitude, working to stabilize the craft in the midst of the storm. His voice was calm as he spoke to the co-pilot. "What's our status?" Kevin asked, eyes darting over the gauges and readings. "Captain lost consciousness about 10 minutes ago, and I've been trying to reach air traffic control for an emergency descent," the co-pilot replied, running a hand over his forehead. "This turbulence came out of nowhere, and we're low on fuel. I've plotted a landing course, but with this wind shear." Kevin nodded, already calculating a plan. "We'll bring her down slowly. We've got a lot of wind resistance, so I'll handle the navigation adjustments. You focus on keeping communication with ground control." With a steady hand, Kevin adjusted the altitude and altered their course, leaning into the motion to offset the crosswinds. Gradually, the jerking and bouncing diminished, and the tension in the cockpit eased, if only slightly. Kevin sensed the co-pilot's gaze, a mixture of surprise and gratitude, as he watched Kevin work. The co-pilot, a young man named Aaron, offered a tentative smile. "I have to admit, when I heard there was a passenger stepping in, I didn't expect someone with your level of expertise. This is unexpected." Kevin nodded, too focused on the controls to fully acknowledge Aaron's comment. "Experience comes in handy in situations like these. Just stay sharp. We'll get through this." Aaron gave a quick nod, his confidence buoyed by Kevin's calm demeanor. He picked up the radio, relaying their status to ground control. The control tower's response was filled with urgency, confirming they were cleared for an emergency landing at a nearby airport. Back in the cabin, the tension was palpable. Sarah lingered near the cockpit, watching the exchange with a mixture of bewilderment and unease. Her earlier dismissal of Kevin hung heavily in her mind, as she processed the reality that he was, in fact, a skilled pilot. She replayed her previous interactions with him, her stomach sinking as she recalled her condescending words. She glanced at Alex, who had resumed his position at the front of the cabin, his face reflecting a cautious optimism. He caught her eye and leaned over, his voice low. "I guess it's true what they say. You really can't judge a book by its cover." Sarah's face flushed, her lips pressed tightly together. She knew he was right, but admitting it was a hard pill to swallow. She had spent her career rising through the ranks by maintaining a strict professional demeanor, but Kevin's calm efficiency and authority now made her feel distinctly small. Silently, she watched the cockpit door, the weight of her prejudice settling like a stone in her chest. Meanwhile, Kevin's focus was unshakable. He coordinated with Aaron, adjusting the plane's approach as they neared the emergency landing site. Each instrument panel reflected a myriad of data, but Kevin read it all with practiced ease, his mind sifting through the information with the clarity that only years of experience could bring. Outside, the dark clouds parted just enough to reveal the faint lights of the landing strip below. Aaron's voice was steady as he confirmed the landing sequence with ground control, while Kevin's hands guided the plane with precise adjustments, preparing for the final descent. "Landing gear deployed," Kevin announced, watching as the co-pilot double-checked the status. The whine of the hydraulics filled the cockpit, followed by a gentle, reassuring vibration as the landing gear locked into place. Back in the cabin, Alex addressed the passengers over the intercom, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our emergency descent and will be landing shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened and follow all crew instructions. We appreciate your cooperation." Kevin's hands remained steady on the controls, guiding the plane in a smooth, gradual descent. Despite the residual turbulence, he could feel the aircraft responding, their descent stabilizing as the runway lights grew closer. With practiced calm, Kevin spoke into the radio. "Control, this is Flight 472. We are on final approach. Preparing for touchdown." "Copy that. Flight 472. Emergency vehicles are standing by. You're cleared to land." The final moments felt suspended in time, every second stretched as they neared the runway. Kevin adjusted their angle, allowing for the slight crosswind, and guided the plane down with the precision of a surgeon. 50 feet, 30, 10. The wheels met the tarmac with a gentle thud, and Kevin deployed the spoilers, engaging the reverse thrusters. The roar of the engines filled the cabin as the plane decelerated, and within moments, they rolled to a gradual stop at the end of the runway. The cabin was silent for a beat before a swell of applause broke out, passengers clapping and cheering in relief. Kevin exhaled, releasing the tension that had coiled in his muscles during the descent. Aaron turned to him, his face a mixture of awe and respect. "Thank you," Aaron said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." Kevin offered a modest nod, his expression calm. "We made it together, Aaron. That's what teamwork is for." Outside the cockpit, the crew and passengers alike were visibly relieved. Alex approached Sarah, who stood frozen in the aisle, her eyes fixed on the cockpit door as if trying to process everything that had just transpired. When the door opened and Kevin emerged, the applause grew louder. Passengers craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the man who had brought them safely to the ground. Kevin offered a humble nod, acknowledging their gratitude but deflecting the hero's status they so eagerly wanted to bestow on him. As the passengers began to disembark, many stopped to thank Kevin personally. A young mother with a toddler in tow gripped his hand tightly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. My daughter and I, we can't thank you enough." A man in a business suit approached next, his face still pale from the ordeal. "Sir, I think I speak for everyone here when I say you're a hero. We owe you our lives." Kevin met each of their gazes with a warm, genuine smile. "I'm glad I could help. Thank you all for trusting us and staying calm." Finally, Sarah approached, her earlier arrogance replaced by humility and regret. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Johnson, she stammered, her words faltering under the weight of her remorse. Kevin looked at her, his face an unreadable mask, but there was no malice in his gaze, only a quiet understanding that made her discomfort even more acute. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "The way I treated you, it was wrong. I was wrong. I made assumptions, and I acted unprofessionally. I can't express how grateful I am that you were here." Kevin inclined his head, his tone even. "Apology accepted, Sarah. I hope this experience gives you a new perspective." She nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment, but Kevin could see a genuine desire to learn in her expression. Sarah glanced away, visibly shaken, as the remaining passengers and crew exited the plane. As the last of the passengers filed out, Kevin returned to the cockpit, where he and Aaron completed the post-flight checks. Outside, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles dotted the tarmac, a stark reminder of the situation they'd just navigated. When Kevin finally exited the plane, he was greeted by airport staff, some of whom expressed their gratitude with handshakes and respectful nods. A senior official from the airline approached, extending his hand. "Mr. Johnson, thank you doesn't seem adequate. Your skill and bravery saved countless lives today. We're honored to have someone of your caliber among our passengers, and we'd like to invite you to discuss some potential opportunities with us, if you're interested." Kevin accepted the handshake with a humble smile. "I appreciate the offer, but let's talk another time. Today was about getting everyone home safe." As he walked through the terminal, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving him feeling both weary and fulfilled. The journey had tested his skills in more ways than one, but he'd remained true to himself, rising above both turbulence and prejudice. Kevin couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing he'd made a difference. As he stepped outside, the cool night air hit his face, refreshing and grounding him. The challenge was over, but its lessons remained. He had faced judgment, discrimination, and a life-or-death crisis, all in a single flight. Yet through it all, he had proven, both to himself and to others, that character and skill were far more powerful than any preconceptions. This, he realized, was more than a flight. It was a journey of resilience, and as he walked away from the airport, Kevin felt ready for whatever new horizons lay ahead. A new beginning. The morning after the harrowing flight, Kevin awoke to the buzzing of his phone. Notifications flooded his screen, texts from friends, calls from family, and a long list of missed messages from his fellow pilots. Word of his actions had already spread, making the evening news and rippling through social media like wildfire. Despite his low-profile nature, Kevin had suddenly become a public figure, admired and lauded for his calm heroism in the face of adversity. One text in particular caught his eye, a message from David Ortega, a high-ranking executive from the airline he had flown with the previous day. David had been among those greeting him at the gate, the weight of his handshake matching the gravity of his words. The text read, "Mr. Johnson, thank you again for your exemplary actions. We'd like to extend an official invitation to meet with you at our headquarters. Please let us know if you're available. We're considering a new role in our leadership team focused on diversity, equity, and training. Hope to discuss this with you soon." Kevin set his phone down, a mix of pride and apprehension filling him. He wasn't one to seek the spotlight, but the chance to make a lasting impact appealed to him, especially if it could lead to a shift in the airline industry. After years of witnessing discrimination and bias in both subtle and overt forms, he felt ready to engage in the fight for change on a larger scale. But before he made any decisions, he needed to clear his head. He reached for his running shoes and headed to the park near his hotel. The brisk morning air felt revitalizing as he ran along the path, each step helping to release the tension of the past day. He replayed the flight in his mind, reliving each moment of turbulence, each split-second decision. He thought of Aaron, the young co-pilot, whose anxiety had shifted into trust as they worked together. He thought of Alex, the flight attendant who had shown compassion even when others hadn't. And he thought of Sarah, the flight attendant whose attitude had been the most difficult to navigate. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the path before him, Kevin resolved to take up David's offer. He would meet with the airline's leadership team, share his experiences, and discuss a path forward. It was time to address the prejudice that so many experienced in silence. But first, he needed to talk to his wife, Lisa. After returning to his hotel, he called her. Her voice was warm and supportive, but he could sense the underlying concern in her words. "Are you sure this is the right move, Kevin? I mean, you know I'll support you no matter what. But do you think they're truly ready for change, or is this just damage control?" Kevin took a deep breath, thinking carefully. "Maybe it's a bit of both," he admitted. "But if they're even considering real change, I want to be part of it. I don't know, Lisa. This might be a chance to make things better for others." People who face this kind of treatment daily and don't have a platform. Lisa's voice softened. I understand, and I'm proud of you, Kevin. You've worked so hard. And if anyone can help change things, it's you. Go show them who you really are. Her words settled over him, bringing a renewed sense of clarity. Kevin thanked her and hung up, feeling more determined than ever. He quickly texted David, accepting the invitation to the meeting. 2 days later, Kevin arrived at the airline's headquarters, a modern high-rise with sleek glass walls, and the company logo proudly displayed at the entrance. Inside, employees bustled around, some glancing curiously at him as he passed, whispering to each other with expressions of recognition and awe. David Ortega greeted him in the lobby with a firm handshake and a welcoming smile. Kevin, I can't thank you enough for coming. We've all been looking forward to meeting with you. Kevin returned the handshake, nodding politely. Thank you for the invitation, David. I appreciate the opportunity. David led him through a series of hallways, eventually arriving at a large conference room where several executives sat waiting. They stood as he entered, offering handshakes and murmurs of gratitude. Among them were the CEO, Amanda Reeves, and several senior managers. Kevin took a seat, feeling the weight of their expectant gazes. Once the introductions were complete, Amanda began the meeting. Kevin, your actions during that flight demonstrated not only exceptional skill, but also a level of composure and integrity that we rarely see. We're incredibly grateful, and we'd like to explore a way for you to join our team in a more permanent capacity. Kevin nodded, listening attentively as she outlined their vision. They wanted him to help design and implement a new program focused on diversity, inclusion, and bias training. The goal was to create a more inclusive environment for employees and passengers alike, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. As Amanda spoke, Kevin felt a spark of excitement. He could see the potential for real change, a chance to break down the walls of prejudice that affected so many. After she finished, Kevin took a moment to gather his thoughts. Thank you, Amanda. I'm honored by the offer. I believe in what you're trying to achieve, but I'd like to address a few concerns. First, I think this initiative has to go beyond training sessions. It needs to be part of the core values that everyone upholds, from the top down. This culture shift has to be ongoing, not a box to check off. Amanda nodded, her expression thoughtful. I completely agree. We want this to be more than a temporary fix. Your input will be invaluable in helping us build a sustainable program. They spent the next hour discussing details, with Kevin sharing ideas and suggestions on how to create a truly inclusive workplace. He proposed a mentorship program to support underrepresented employees, as well as a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment. The executives listened intently, nodding along as he spoke, clearly invested in his vision. Toward the end of the meeting, David leaned forward, his gaze earnest. Kevin, we'd like to officially offer you the position of Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. You'd have full autonomy to shape this initiative and lead our team in creating a lasting impact. Kevin was momentarily taken aback by the offer. The position was prestigious and came with significant influence, but it would mean stepping away from flying full-time. He loved the skies, the thrill of piloting an aircraft, and the freedom it offered. But this role represented a different kind of impact, a chance to shape the future for countless others. I'm honored, Kevin replied, his voice steady. But I'd like to propose a hybrid role. Let me continue flying part-time, so I stay grounded in the reality of what our crew and passengers experience. I believe I can be most effective if I maintain that connection. David and Amanda exchanged glances, nodding in agreement. I think that's a great idea, Amanda said. We want this role to reflect the unique perspective you bring. They concluded the meeting with handshakes and expressions of gratitude, and as Kevin left the room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This role would be a challenge, but it was one he was prepared to face. He had overcome turbulence in the air. Now it was time to face turbulence on the ground. That evening, as Kevin settled into his hotel room, He received a call from an unknown number. He answered, his curiosity piqued. "Hello, is this Mr. Kevin Johnson?" A hesitant voice asked. "Yes, this is Kevin. Who's calling?" There was a pause, followed by a deep breath. "It's Sarah." From the flight. Kevin was momentarily taken aback, the memory of her cold treatment surfacing. "Sarah. Hi. I just wanted to say, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you an apology," she stammered. Her voice was heavy with remorse. "The way I treated you was unacceptable. I misjudged you, and I acted on my biases. It's not something I'm proud of." Kevin listened, allowing her words to settle. He could hear the sincerity in her voice, the weight of regret that came from truly understanding the impact of her actions. "Thank you for apologizing, Sarah," he replied, his tone measured. "I accept your apology. I hope this experience has helped you see things differently." "It has," she admitted. "I'm taking a leave from work to address some things. I have a lot to learn, but I wanted to tell you personally that I'm going to change." Kevin felt a sense of closure, a quiet reassurance that sometimes even the hardest lessons could lead to growth. As the call ended, he looked out the window at the city lights, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. This journey had been about more than just piloting a plane. It had been about piloting change, both for himself and for others. Kevin knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, challenges, and moments of doubt. But he was ready, fueled by the belief that even the smallest acts of courage could inspire a ripple effect of change. And as he closed his eyes, a vision of the future filled his mind. A world where people were seen not for the color of their skin, but for the strength of their character. It was a future worth fighting for, and Kevin was determined to see it soar, taking flight in a new role. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the airline's headquarters as Kevin arrived for his first official day as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. The title still felt surreal to him, but he welcomed the challenge. He had come here not just to enact policies, but to create a shift in the way people thought, felt, and interacted. The airline industry was notoriously traditional, but Kevin's mission was to push it into a new era, one of equity and empathy. Kevin had barely stepped into his office when David, the airline executive who had championed his role, knocked on the door. "Kevin, great to see you back here," David greeted him with a firm handshake. "The team is eager to meet you. Are you ready?" Kevin smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of stepping into something new. More than ready. David led him through the sleek corridors, finally arriving at a large conference room filled with employees from various departments: human resources, marketing, flight operations, and even some pilot representatives. Some faces were curious, others guarded, but all eyes were on Kevin as he took his place at the front of the room. David introduced him, highlighting the heroic events on the flight that had led to this moment. He spoke with genuine admiration, and Kevin could feel the respect in the room growing as David recounted the details of how Kevin had calmly taken control of a near-crisis situation in midair. When he finally handed over the floor, Kevin took a moment to look around the room, allowing the silence to settle. "Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone here for the warm welcome," Kevin began, his voice steady and direct. "I know many of you might wonder why I'm here, beyond the title and the events that brought me here. Let me make it clear. I'm here to work with you, not over you. I'm here to create a space where each one of us, regardless of who we are, can bring our best selves to work." He could see nods of agreement, the initial skepticism starting to fade. Kevin continued, sharing his vision of a culture rooted in respect and inclusivity. He spoke about the importance of seeing beyond labels, about the responsibility each employee had in creating an environment free from prejudice. He emphasized that diversity was not a buzzword, but a value that had the power to uplift everyone, making the workplace safer, more supportive, and ultimately more productive. As he finished, he opened the floor for questions. A hand shot up, a young woman with a serious expression. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice filled with genuine concern, How do you plan to address incidents of bias or discrimination that happen at the ground level? I mean, we can have policies, but if people aren't held accountable? Kevin nodded, recognizing the importance of her question. Excellent point. Policies are a foundation, but accountability is what makes them effective. In this role, I intend to work closely with HR and other departments to create clear, enforceable protocols. But more importantly, I want to build an environment where people feel empowered to speak up. Every voice in this room has the power to change this company. The woman's eyes softened, and a few others nodded in agreement. Kevin could sense the subtle shift in the room, a willingness to listen, to learn, to grow. As the meeting concluded, Kevin felt both the weight of responsibility and a deep sense of possibility. He was about to embark on a journey to reshape the airline from within, and the foundation had just been set. The following weeks were intense. Kevin's days were filled with back-to-back meetings, each department eager to introduce him to their unique challenges and dynamics. He worked alongside HR to design a rigorous anti-bias training program, consulting with psychologists and sociologists to create a curriculum grounded in empathy and self-awareness. He also implemented a mentorship program, pairing senior staff with junior employees from underrepresented backgrounds, creating pathways for growth that hadn't existed before. But the most impactful change came when he introduced something he called the Empathy Initiative. This program aimed to foster understanding by encouraging employees to share their personal stories with each other in safe, facilitated group sessions. Kevin had seen firsthand how powerful shared experiences could be in breaking down barriers, and he wanted to cultivate that in the workplace. The first session took place on a Friday afternoon, and Kevin himself was the first to share his story. He recounted his journey to becoming a pilot, the challenges he faced, and the prejudices he encountered. He spoke candidly about the flight where Sarah's treatment had underscored the importance of standing tall against discrimination, even in the most unlikely places. As he finished, the room was silent. Then, a young man named Jason, who worked in maintenance, raised his hand. "I grew up in a community where nobody thought a guy like me would make it out," Jason began, his voice thick with emotion. "But I worked hard, just like you did. And hearing your story, Kevin, it reminds me that we're all on our own journeys, but those journeys make us stronger. I want to help create that kind of place here, where we see each other's stories instead of each other's skin color or background." Kevin smiled, feeling a surge of pride. This was what he had envisioned, a workplace where vulnerability became strength, where shared experiences united people. The session continued, each person's story adding another layer to the complex, beautiful tapestry of perspectives that made up the airline. The Empathy Initiative quickly gained momentum. Employees began looking forward to the sessions, eagerly sharing their experiences and learning from others. Walls that had once divided them started to crumble, replaced by bridges of mutual respect and understanding. And Kevin knew this was only the beginning. A few months later, Kevin received a surprising message from Sarah. After her heartfelt apology on the phone, she had taken a leave from work, attending intensive sensitivity training, and even volunteering at a local nonprofit focused on racial justice. The email was brief but sincere. "Mr. Johnson, I hope you're well. I wanted to reach out to thank you again. These past months have been a time of deep reflection and growth for me. I've come to understand the biases I held and the harm they caused. If there's a place for me in the new vision you're building at the airline, I'd like to rejoin the team and continue learning from you. Best, Sarah." Kevin read the message twice, feeling the weight of her words. Sarah's journey mirrored the kind of transformation he hoped to inspire in others. He thought back to that flight, to the look of disdain in her eyes, and then to the look of remorse he'd seen afterward. She was a reminder of the importance of second chances and the possibility of growth. He replied simply, inviting her to join the next Empathy Initiative session. He would reserve judgment until he saw her actions firsthand, but he was willing to give her a chance to prove she had changed. The day of Sarah's return was met with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Her colleagues remembered her behavior from the flight, and though many had heard of her leave and the steps she'd taken, they watched her warily. But Sarah came back with humility, her demeanor subdued, and her attitude noticeably changed. She attended the empathy initiative session, sitting quietly until it was her turn to speak. When she finally did, her voice was soft but steady. "I want to start by acknowledging my actions on that flight," she began, her gaze unwavering. "I judged someone unfairly, and my biases were exposed in the worst possible way. I'm not proud of it, but I'm here because I want to learn. I want to be better." The room was silent as she spoke, her vulnerability evident. She went on to describe the steps she'd taken, the training, the self-reflection, and the commitment she'd made to confront her biases. By the time she finished, a few people were nodding, clearly moved by her honesty. Kevin watched her carefully, noting the sincerity in her voice. He knew that change was rarely a straight line. It was a journey filled with challenges, setbacks, and hard-won progress. Sarah's return was a testament to that journey, and he was cautiously optimistic that she would rise to the occasion. Over the next few months, Kevin's work continued to gain momentum. Reports of bias incidents declined significantly, replaced by a culture of support and inclusivity. The airline received positive media attention, and employees reported feeling more valued and respected than ever before. One evening, as Kevin was preparing to leave the office, David stopped by his door. "Kevin, I have to say, what you've done here, it's incredible. I don't think any of us could have predicted the level of change you'd bring," David said, his voice filled with admiration. Kevin smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "It's a team effort, David. Change only happens when everyone's willing to work together." David nodded, acknowledging the truth in Kevin's words. "I'm grateful we crossed paths. You've shown us what true leadership looks like." Kevin thanked him and made his way out of the building. As he walked through the bustling city streets, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey had taken him from the cockpit to the boardroom, from facing discrimination to fostering unity. And as he looked toward the future, he knew he wasn't finished. He had taken flight in more ways than one, and now he was helping others find the courage to do the same. The road ahead would not be easy, but Kevin was ready for the challenge. Driven by a vision of a world where everyone could soar, unhindered by prejudice, and buoyed by the strength of unity. When winds of change meet resistance, Kevin's efforts had shifted the airline's culture profoundly. Employees were more engaged, respectful interactions had become the norm, and many workers, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, felt they had a voice within the company. However, as impactful as these changes were, not everyone welcomed them. Some felt uncomfortable with the shift, and the pushback began to surface subtly but steadily. It started with murmurs in the hallways, quiet comments shared between certain employees who felt that the company's newfound focus on inclusivity and respect went too far. A few seasoned pilots, who'd been with the airline for decades, would exchange skeptical glances during empathy initiative sessions or brush off the diversity programs as corporate fluff. Kevin overheard whispers from employees who felt the changes were unnecessary, or worse, that they were being forced into a culture they didn't resonate with. One morning, as Kevin prepared for a meeting with the HR director to review feedback on the latest training session, he received an email flagged urgent. Opening it, he found a message from Jonathan, a senior pilot with over 25 years at the airline. Jonathan had been with the airline since its early days and held considerable sway among other employees. He was respected, but he had made no secret of his discomfort with Kevin's efforts. The email was brief but blunt. "Mr. Johnson, I've spent my entire career here and have seen this airline through its best and worst times. But this inclusive culture you're pushing, it's becoming a distraction. People are here to do a job, not to sit through therapy sessions or be lectured about how we should treat each other. Some of us feel that we're being treated like children, and frankly, it's affecting morale. Maybe it's time to ease up." Kevin sat back in his chair, the words sinking in. He had known from the start that not everyone would support his work, but hearing it so directly from someone of Jonathan's stature stung. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that change was never easy, especially when it challenged deeply ingrained beliefs. After a moment's thought, he typed a response. "Jonathan, I appreciate you sharing your concerns. I understand that these changes feel uncomfortable, especially when they're different from what we've known for so long. However, our focus on inclusivity and respect isn't about lecturing. It's about ensuring that everyone feels valued and supported, which ultimately strengthens our team. I'd like to meet with you to discuss this in person. Perhaps we can find common ground. Let me know if you're available." The reply came quickly. "Fine. See you in my office tomorrow at 10. Kevin knew this would be a crucial conversation. Jonathan represented a mindset he'd encountered before, one that held on to tradition and resisted change. But he also knew that people like Jonathan could become allies if given the chance to understand the purpose behind the work. The next day, Kevin walked into Jonathan's office with an open mind and a calm demeanor. Jonathan greeted him with a polite nod, his posture rigid and his expression guarded. "Thanks for making the time to meet, Jonathan," Kevin began, settling into a chair across from him. Jonathan folded his arms, his gaze steady. "I'll be honest, Kevin, I don't see the point in all this. We've been doing things a certain way for decades, and now it feels like everything we knew is being flipped on its head. I'm not saying inclusivity isn't important, but it feels forced. People just want to do their jobs without being told how to act or think." Kevin listened, nodding thoughtfully. He knew Jonathan wasn't alone in his perspective. "I hear you, Jonathan," Kevin replied. "And I get it. This work can feel uncomfortable, especially when it's presented as mandatory. But what I'm trying to do here isn't about telling anyone how to act or think. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels respected, where our differences make us stronger as a team. When people feel valued, they perform better, and that benefits everyone." Jonathan's expression softened slightly, but his skepticism lingered. "I've been with this airline long enough to know that people have always found ways to work together. I worry that by focusing on these programs, we're losing sight of what actually makes a good team: experience, discipline, and the willingness to get the job done." Kevin leaned forward, his voice calm yet firm. "Experience and discipline are crucial, absolutely. But think about it. How many talented people have we overlooked because they didn't fit a certain mold? How many voices have gone unheard because they felt they didn't belong? Creating an inclusive culture doesn't take away from discipline or experience. It enhances them by bringing diverse perspectives and skills to the table." Jonathan paused, his gaze shifting as he processed Kevin's words. There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Maybe I've been looking at it all wrong," he admitted slowly. "But I'll be honest, Kevin, I don't know if everyone here will see it that way." Kevin nodded, appreciating Jonathan's candor. "Change is hard, Jonathan. I know that. But I believe that when people see the positive impact, when they feel it firsthand, they'll come around. And if you're willing, I'd appreciate your support in helping us get there." Jonathan took a deep breath, then extended his hand. "All right, Kevin. I'll give it a shot. For the sake of the team, and because I respect what you did on that flight." Kevin shook his hand, feeling a surge of hope. He knew that winning Jonathan's support was a significant step. If he could get even the skeptics to open their minds, the change would have a much stronger foundation. Over the following weeks, Kevin continued his work with renewed energy. He hosted workshops, led team-building exercises, and introduced new initiatives designed to make inclusion a core part of the company culture. Jonathan kept his word, attending the sessions and even offering input during discussions. Other employees who had initially resisted began to warm to the changes, and the ripple effect was noticeable. But as things progressed, Kevin received a surprise one evening while reviewing emails. A message had come through from Sarah, who was working under him as part of the Empathy Initiative. She had been actively engaged, helping to facilitate sessions and sharing her own experiences. The subject line read, "Important Discovery in Empathy Program." Curious, Kevin opened the email and read, "Hi Kevin, I wanted to share something I learned today. During our last Empathy Initiative session, several employees opened up about feeling uncomfortable with how quickly everything has changed. But what surprised me was hearing them say they feel like they're walking on eggshells, afraid of saying the wrong thing or being labeled insensitive. I think they're struggling to reconcile the idea of change with their own self-image. And it's creating tension." Kevin leaned back, considering her words. He realized that while many were embracing the shift, others might feel threatened, uncertain of how to express themselves without crossing lines they didn't fully understand. This insight was crucial. It meant they needed to take a new approach to bridge the gap between those comfortable with change and those still finding their footing. Kevin typed a quick response, thanking her for the insight and suggesting they brainstorm ways to address these concerns. The next week, Kevin held a meeting to address the challenges that Sarah had raised. He invited employees from various departments, making it clear that this was a safe space for open dialogue. As the meeting began, he addressed the group, his tone empathetic yet firm. "I know some of you feel like these changes are happening fast, and that it's hard to adjust. I want to acknowledge that, and I want you to know that feeling uncertain is okay. This space is for all of us to share our thoughts openly." A middle-aged technician named Mike raised his hand. "Kevin, I'll be honest. I don't understand a lot of the new guidelines. I worry that if I say the wrong thing, it could cost me my job. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope." Kevin nodded, recognizing the vulnerability in Mike's words. "I appreciate you sharing that, Mike. And you're not alone. Many people are feeling that way. That's why we're here, to talk openly and learn from each other without judgment." Others chimed in, expressing similar concerns. Kevin guided the conversation, encouraging empathy and understanding on both sides. It was clear that the rapid pace of change had created anxiety, but by giving people a space to voice these feelings, he saw them begin to relax. After the meeting, Sarah approached him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Kevin. This is exactly what we needed, to feel like we could talk openly without fear." Kevin smiled. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sarah. Change is never perfect, but if we stay committed to learning and adapting, we'll make it work." As the weeks passed, the airline's culture continued to evolve. More employees felt comfortable expressing their thoughts, leading to a deeper level of engagement. The company's efforts began attracting attention in the industry, with other airlines reaching out to Kevin to learn from his approach. He was invited to speak at conferences, sharing the story of how the airline had navigated both literal and metaphorical turbulence to build a stronger, more inclusive environment. One day, as he was preparing for another presentation, Jonathan approached him, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Kevin," he began, "I didn't think I'd say this, but I'm glad we made these changes. The team feels different, better. People are looking out for each other in ways I hadn't seen before." Kevin grinned, a feeling of fulfillment washing over him. "That's all I ever wanted, Jonathan. To show that when we work together, when we see each other fully, we're stronger as a team." Jonathan nodded, his respect evident. "Well, you did it, and I'm grateful you didn't give up on us." As Kevin returned to his office, he took a moment to reflect on the journey. He had come to the airline to make a difference, and now he could see the fruits of his labor in every interaction, every shared smile between colleagues who once felt divided. There was still work to be done, but he knew they were on the right path. For Kevin, the true victory lay not in the titles or accolades, but in the transformation he had sparked within the hearts and minds of those around him. The skies were no longer the only place where he felt free. He had found that same freedom in the unity of a team determined to rise above their differences and take flight together. A legacy takes flight. Months turned into a year, and Kevin's work at the airline began to resonate far beyond its walls. The Empathy Initiative, once met with skepticism, had transformed the company's culture into one of mutual respect and inclusion. Employees reported higher job satisfaction, and even the passengers noticed the difference. Flight attendants were more attentive, gate agents more welcoming, and pilots more communicative, making the airline stand out for its exceptional service. Kevin's efforts were sparking a ripple effect across the entire industry. His story gained media attention, especially as other airlines began to implement similar programs. Kevin became a sought-after speaker, sharing insights at conferences and industry events, encouraging others to foster inclusive environments. At each event, he reminded audiences that the core of his work wasn't about policies, it was about people and their journeys. Change, he emphasized, came from understanding each other, from courageously facing biases, and from embracing empathy. The shift in his own airline continued to deepen, and Kevin was particularly touched by the stories he heard from colleagues about how the culture had changed their lives. He heard from flight attendants who felt empowered to address issues of bias head-on, pilots who now had the freedom to express themselves without fear, and employees across departments who felt a sense of belonging they'd never known before. He began to see his journey as part of something much bigger, an evolving legacy of compassion and resilience. One crisp autumn afternoon, Kevin was approached by Amanda Reeves, the airline's CEO, who had been a strong ally in his work. She had been instrumental in supporting the initiatives, providing resources, and advocating for change, even when it met resistance. "Kevin," Amanda said as she entered his office, her face brimming with enthusiasm, "I have something exciting to share with you." Kevin looked up, intrigued. "What's on your mind, Amanda?" She took a seat, leaning forward as she spoke. "We've been invited to receive an industry award for our work on inclusion and diversity. The board and I think you should accept it on behalf of the airline. This award is a testament to the transformation you've led here, and it's only fitting that you be the one to accept it." Kevin's initial reaction was one of humility, but he couldn't deny the pride he felt. This recognition was a milestone not only for him, but for everyone who had supported the journey. He thought of Lisa, his wife, who had encouraged him to take this path, of Aaron, the young co-pilot whose trust had spurred Kevin's actions that fateful day, and even of Sarah, who had since become one of the most vocal champions of inclusivity at the airline. "That's an incredible honor, Amanda. I'd be grateful to accept on behalf of everyone who helped make this possible," Kevin replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. As the date of the award ceremony approached, Kevin prepared his speech, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The ups and downs, the resistance and breakthroughs, the setbacks and victories. Each part of the process had deepened his understanding of leadership, compassion, and resilience. The ceremony was held in New York City, attended by leaders from across the aviation industry. As Kevin took the stage, he looked out over the audience, feeling the weight of the moment. This award wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had experienced the journey alongside him. He began his speech, his voice steady and clear. "When I first took on this role, I never imagined the impact it would have, not just on me, but on all of us. This award is a testament to what can happen when we choose to listen, to learn, and to grow together." He went on to describe the events that had led to his role, recounting the flight that had been a turning point not only for his career but for the airline. He spoke of the courage it took to confront biases, both within oneself and within a team. And he emphasized that true change came not from policy alone, but from the commitment to uphold respect and kindness in every interaction. As he finished, the audience rose in applause, their faces reflecting admiration and respect. Among them, he noticed familiar faces, members of his airline's team, each one part of the legacy they had built together. After the ceremony, people approached him to express their appreciation. Executives from other airlines asked for advice on implementing similar initiatives, and industry leaders praised the impact of his work. But among the many people who congratulated him, one face stood out: Jonathan, the senior pilot who had once expressed resistance to the changes. Jonathan extended his hand, a warm smile on his face. "Kevin, I have to tell you, I didn't understand at first, but I've watched the way you've led this change, and it's changed me. You've taught me that inclusion isn't just a policy, it's a mindset. I'm grateful for that, and I'm honored to be part of this team." Kevin shook his hand, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. "Thank you, Jonathan. Your support has meant more than you know. This journey wouldn't have been the same without everyone's willingness to learn and grow together." The two men shared a moment of quiet understanding, a recognition of the power of transformation, both in the workplace and within themselves. The months that followed the award ceremony were filled with new opportunities. Kevin continued to speak and consult, helping other airlines and companies adopt the values that had reshaped his own organization. His story became a symbol of resilience in the face of bias, and his approach, a blend of empathy, patience, and perseverance, was embraced by leaders across industries. One day, as he was about to leave the office, he received a message from Sarah, who had continued to grow in her role within the Empathy Initiative. The email subject read, "A success story you need to hear." Curious, Kevin opened the email and read, "Kevin, I wanted to share an experience from one of our recent sessions. We had a new employee, Amara, who just joined our team. She's the first woman in her family to become a flight attendant, and she mentioned how daunting it was to step into a space where she felt she might be judged. But she said that during our session, she felt accepted for who she was and empowered to bring her full self to work. She thanked us, saying that she feels like she's part of a family here. It was such a beautiful moment, and I thought you'd want to know that your work has created a place where people like Amara can thrive." Kevin felt a surge of emotion as he read her words. This was the true legacy of his work, not awards or accolades, but stories like Amara's, stories of individuals who could now bring their whole selves to work without fear or hesitation. As he reflected on his journey, Kevin realized that his role as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer had been a flight of its own, a journey filled with challenges, turbulence, and moments of profound clarity. But more than anything, it had been a journey of resilience, of believing that every step, no matter how small, could make a difference. 2 years later, Kevin stood at the departure gate of an international flight bound for London. He was returning to the cockpit for the first time in months, eager to experience once again the thrill of flying and the sense of freedom it brought him. As he walked down the aisle to the cockpit, passengers greeted him with warm smiles and nods of respect, some recognizing him from his work with the airline. He exchanged greetings with the crew, including Sarah, who had been assigned to the same flight. "Welcome back to the skies, Captain Johnson," she said with a smile that held none of the guardedness from that first fateful flight. Now it was filled with respect and warmth, a testament to the transformation she had undergone. "Good to be back, Sarah," Kevin replied, his smile genuine. They shared a nod of mutual respect, both aware of how far they had come. As Kevin took his place in the cockpit, he felt the familiar hum of the engines beneath him. The instrument panel lit up, each gauge and button a reminder of the journey that had led him here. Flying had been his first love, and now, as he looked out at the endless expanse of sky, he felt a renewed appreciation for it. The co-pilot, a young woman named Leela, settled into her seat next to him. She looked over, a hint of excitement in her eyes. "Captain Johnson, I just wanted to say, your story is part of what inspired me to become a pilot. It's an honor to fly with you." Kevin felt a swell of pride, realizing that his journey had inspired the next generation to chase their dreams. "Thank you, Leela. Let's make this a great flight." As they lifted off, Kevin felt the familiar rush of freedom. But this time, there was something more, a sense of fulfillment, a knowledge that his legacy was soaring along with him. The city disappeared beneath them, replaced by clouds and endless blue sky. As he guided the plane, Kevin looked forward to a future where he and others like him would continue to inspire change, to create workplaces filled with empathy, and to pave the way for those who would follow. His story was no longer just his own. It was a legacy, a testament to the strength of resilience, the power of empathy, and the belief that no one should ever be defined by assumptions or biases. And as he navigated through the sky, Kevin knew that he was, in every sense, exactly where he was meant to be.